Okay, so I have pressed record. It is 12:30, but we are expecting a couple more people, so we'll just hang on a couple of moments. But to anyone joining us, you are in the right place. And we'll begin. And I do apologise, that's my child.
That's a nice sound.
Trying to share.
Terry, are you all right? Or shall
yes.
I? Yeah.
No, you're okay.
Okay.
Okay, then we will make a start now. So welcome everybody to today's session. It is the Walsall Right for Children meet and greet next with Walsall Safeguarding Partnership. As always, today's session will be recorded, so you can see and hear us, but we won't be able to see you unless you put on your camera. But as we are expecting quite a few people to join us, if we can just ask everybody if they could keep their cameras off and please mute their mics unless you are presenting. You can ask any questions in the chat function, and please feel free to ask these along the way, and the team will pick them up at the end of the session. Any slideshow that's shown today will be sent out following the session with an evaluation. The evaluation only takes a couple of moments, if you could kindly fill that in for us. And as always, the recording will be available on the Walsall Safeguarding Partnership website, so you are free to go back and rewatch it any time. I will just make my way through. So firstly, I'm going to pass over to, I believe, is it Liz?
It is.
It is. So I'll pass over to Liz now. Sorry.
Thank you. So hi everybody. I've got my camera on, so hopefully people can put a face to the name. So I'm Liz Murphy, and I'm the independent chair of the Walsall Safeguarding Partnership. So if we want to go to the next slide, Kerry, in terms of probably the next but one, I'm just going to a slide about what we'll hopefully achieve. Yep. So when we were invited to take part in this meet and greet session, one of the things that I spent some time thinking about was, well, what would make it meaningful, and that people will go away with something, and equally, what is it that the Safeguarding Partnership can learn from your contribution here today? Oh, is the screen wobbling a bit? Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to give a very brief overview of the role of the Safeguarding Partnership, and then focus on describing the new arrangements for reviewing serious child safeguarding incidences. And then I'm going to do a little bit of information, but actually I've got a colleague from Walsall Healthcare Trust, so Anne Sargent, the named midwife, who you'll meet very shortly, is then going to give us some information about a national resource to support parents' care for crying babies. And that's because one of the key issues that we are learning, both locally and nationally, is about injuries to non-mobile babies and risk of physical injury to children under 1. And then finally, we want to hear your views. So hopefully when you've had some of the learning from our recent reviews, to think about how best as a partnership we can get some of the key messages that come out of safeguarding reviews to the front line, to those people who can use it in their practice when they're working with children and families. And our other aim, which I think is a challenge, but why not set our aim high, is to be interactive. So do use the chat, put your hand up. There's probably enough of us, I think, for us to be able to. I'm happy to take questions, and I know both Anne and I have built in some time for questions later. And then there is one interactive exercise that you'll be able to use if you've got your laptop in front of you. Okay, should we go to the next slide? Thank you, Kerry. So just really briefly then, the Walsall Safeguarding Partnership, and you've got the link, the website link will be at the end of the slides, replaces what you may have been familiar with in terms of when you would have heard the Walsall Safeguarding Children Board or the LSCB. And LSCBs were abolished in last year. That was a government decision, and the thinking is that the language that that came out from the Department for Education was that actually what safeguards children is a partnership. And that's why on that first slide I've talked about that this was a move away from a board or a meeting to a focus on partnership, and that's both a frontline practice, so people needing to work together, but also at a strategic level. For the safeguarding board, so was the responsibility to set that up was that of the local authority. So in Walsall, that was the council. And the new legislation places a shared and equal responsibility for developing the partnership arrangements on 3 partners, and that is the local authority, so the council, it is the police, and it is the clinical commissioning group, so a body in health that has a significant role around commissioning health services. Now, what I really want to emphasise is those partners have got the responsibility for developing the partnership arrangements, but actually everybody else is as much an equal partner in terms of safeguarding children. So you'll see that what the partnership does is about coordinating safeguarding across all the relevant partners and agencies, and that includes the voluntary sector. And the sorts of things that, so I almost think about, and I think, how do you explain what coordination means? It's like the building blocks about if there was somebody in a school, and schools go back, who's got a concern about a child that needs to make a referral. That just doesn't happen by there's processes that need to be put in place. There's criteria, so there's threshold guidance, there'll be a referral form, there's a pathway, and people need to be trained and supported to be able to know what to do. So those are the sorts of things that sit behind that phrase coordination. Then one of the things that the Safeguarding Partnership does, in addition to that coordination, is evaluating the evidence of impact. So the difference it is making to the lives of children and their families. And one of the ways that it does that is through an element of independent scrutiny. So previously, safeguarding boards had to have an independent chair. And that was thought that was how that brought some independence into the safeguarding system. And the thinking both nationally and following a review that the government commissioned was that you can separate out the chairing of partnership arrangements or meetings from a scrutiny role, and that actually you might have somebody who will focus on a particular aspect of your arrangements or practices or something that you are wanting to explore a little bit more. So it's that move away from the chair to a scrutiny role. And then the other important role of the partnership is about the review of serious child safeguarding cases, and that's really what we're going to focus on today. That's a nice segue into the next slide, please, Kerry. Oh, thank you. So in the same way that local safeguarding children boards were abolished last year, that what you may well have heard in terms of the language you will have heard of serious case reviews, they were also abolished and replaced with a new way of reviewing serious child safeguarding cases. And I think they were, people, they again, the outcome of the national review, but just from talking to people in all professionals, they've become tarnished, both in terms of that they'd almost seen the focus had become about who didn't do what, so associated with blame, and that they were also very, very lengthy and bureaucratic processes. So from the time from when the serious incident might have happened, that the learning actually was sometimes 2 years down the line before that was getting out into the safeguarding system. So the new system is designed to address both of those challenges. It's designed to be productive rather than punitive, and also the third bullet point, to close the gap between incident, review and learning. And it will do that through two new ways. So after any serious child safeguarding incident, and there is a threshold for that that's set out in statutory guidance, which in essence is about if a child has died or has been seriously harmed, so not significantly harmed, that's the threshold for child protection, safeguarding, child protection month, but seriously harmed, and as a result of abuse or neglect, that would then trigger the need for what the first stage, which is a rapid review. And a rapid review is exactly what it says on the tin. It's to be done in 15 days, so it's a tall order, but it brings partners together who were involved in the case to identify, to explore what's happened and to identify the learning. And the ambition is, so the ambition of the Department for Education is that those processes should be where the learning takes place, that we should be able to use that to gather the learning, rather than needing to go on to automatically needing to go on to stage 2. And stage 2 would be, so is called a child safeguarding practice review. And that is any further work that comes out of the rapid review that is about exploring aspects of safeguarding practice in the local area. And I've really made the, hopefully people have heard that I've focused on practice. So the thinking is that these reviews now should focus on exactly what I'm saying, how agencies have worked together or a particular aspect of practice, rather than the story and the story of the child and their family. So this really is about driving learning. And that in addition to the, sorry, did somebody say something? Okay, I'll carry on in terms of if somebody wants to say something, just put your hand up and I can pick it up. In addition to those local stage 2 processes, there can also be a national child safeguarding practice review. So something that where there was considered to be learning for many areas, or something that is a national challenge in terms of safeguarding children, can be the subject of a national review. And there has been 2 completed so far. The first was one around child exploitation. The second is about is about sudden unexpected death in infants. And the third that is in progress is about non-accidental injury to children under 1. And those I suppose describe now that those 3 elements describe the new arrangements for reviewing child safeguarding cases, serious child safeguarding cases. And the aim is that we want to be able to help build an evidence base, a base of what works, and then to help the workforce in terms of getting the learning out that is accessible and that you can use. So it's not just because, and I'll come back to that at a later slide, so it's not about the story about what didn't happen, it's more about what good practice or what the learning is as we go through and work through some of the challenging cases that we face on a day-to-day basis. So let's go to the next slide, Kerry. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the learning, and this is Walsall learning in respect of injuries to non-mobile babies. And this is learning from 2 very recent rapid reviews, and also a serious case review that was commissioned last year and is yet to be published. It's not published because of criminal proceedings. So I suppose I'm just making that point that these are this learning is relevant to Walsall. And the first is about the recognition of the significance of injuries in non-mobile babies. And there's that nice little mantra there that says, those who don't cruise rarely bruise. And I know I'll say a little bit more about that, but actually a bruise or a mark on a non-mobile baby should be something that raises concerns. And as a result of that, the final bullet point on this slide talks about new procedures. So this isn't an issue that's specific to Walsall. So we have developed regionally some procedures about responding to injuries or bruising in non-mobile babies. So the link is there. It's very accessible. It's broken down into, it gives advice to specific groups of professionals. So I'd really encourage people to take some time out. It won't take long, 10 minutes to familiarise yourself with that new guidance. The second thing that has come out of our learning is the importance of role that paediatricians play. You know, they're the experts in terms of examining children. And that children who are non-mobile, who've got an injury or a bruise or a mark, a paediatric examination is the way that helps us to determine what may have happened to the child. And it's most likely that after following that, there will be a strategy discussion where partners come together, and that's what's played out in the advice in those new procedures. So the strategy discussion is where all partners can come together to be able to explore the information that's available. And one of the really key learning points from the most recent rapid review was a common understanding of medical terms. And so it's just about shared language and shared understanding, but it was absolutely critical in making sure that everybody understood what actually the medical opinion was. So the phrase unexplained does not mean that the child may not have been injured. So an unexplained injury actually means there is no plausible explanation, but that is the description that a paediatrician will use as guided by their Royal College. But you may think that unexplained means, oh well, there's another explanation, that there is an explanation, there could be an explanation, but unexplained means that there is no explanation for how the injury has been caused. And if a baby's not mobile, going back to that little mantra, well, actually, if you can't move, how else has that injury been caused? If the parents haven't been able to give an explanation, that the paediatrician provides an adequate explanation. And then there's another term there that I've put in terms of petechiae, which is a form of bruising. And for those people who on the call who've got a medic background, you'll be more familiar with that. But it's basically some dotting bruising around a bigger bruise. And that is more indicative, if that's present, that's more indicative of non-accidental injury, so abuse to a non-mobile baby. And again, the significance of that phrase and that type of bruising wasn't always understood, and it's why would it be? You know, that's why we have to all work together. So actually having some knowledge about what marks are more concerning is really helpful. And you'll see on that last but one bullet point, I've put a link to the NSPCC resource on bruising in children. Again, I think that's 4 or 5 pages long. For those of you who work with this population of children, actually it covers all ages, but it's really helpful, and it gives some clear guidance about what types of bruising might be more suspicious in a way that any professional can understand. It's not, you wouldn't need to be have a medical or clinical expertise to be able to understand that. And what we've talked about then is needing for the multi-agency assessment of risk of harm to be carried out, but to get together in that strategy discussion. So we need to be professionally curious when somebody says something is unexplained. What do you mean? What's the most ask the question, what in your opinion is the most likely cause for how this child has sustained this injury? And that's then what we would work off. And then finally on this slide, you'll see that I've got the bullet point on discharge planning meetings, and just for children who have been admitted to hospital and have been cared for in hospital, possibly because there's been some examinations as a result of bruising and injuries, that discharge planning meetings play a really important role in terms of the care of for the child once they are return home or to their family. So just to emphasize how important that they are. Okay, I think I'm now ready to hand over to Anne. But I'm just before I do, I'm just going to pause and offer. I can see Isabel's put, feel free to ask any questions. So does anybody want to ask anything, either putting your hand up or in the chat at the moment? Kellyanne's helpfully put the link in about the bruises leaflet. Okay, let's go over to you then, Anne.
Lovely, thank you, Liz. And just to pick up on the last point about your discharge planning meetings, some of you may or may not be aware that when we have a newborn on a child protection plan, we do have a discharge planning meeting, either on the postnatal ward or we do it via telephone. And actually we did 3 on Tuesday, 1 for Walsall, 2 for Sandwell. They didn't take very long, but in the presence of the parents, it made it very clear about the expectations about taking your newborn on a child protection plan home. So I just wanted to add that in. Thank you, Liz. Okay, so I'm Anne Sargent. I'm the named midwife for Safeguarding Children, and I'm talking to you this afternoon about the ICON programme, the infant crying and how to cope. The mantra really from this is that babies cry and you can cope. So I don't know how many of you in this session today have actually heard of ICON. Have you seen it advertised? I know Kerry will be monitoring the chat. So I'm not sure how many of you know about that. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about it, and we've got some links for you at the end. So next slide, please, Kerry. So what is ICON? Well, it's leading on nicely from what Liz was saying about abusive head trauma. It's about abuse occurring to babies, particularly our non-mobile babies, and I'll include non-mobile children because we may have a child who's also non-mobile. But ICON was set up as a preventative campaign to raise awareness amongst parents and carers about abusive head trauma and the research linking that and crying. And it was conceived in 2016 by Suzanne Smith, who's the chief advisor for ICON. And at the end of the presentation, there's a link to one of the sessions that she delivered on Future NHS last month. And ICON was then taken up initially by the Hampshire Safeguarding Children's Board, as it was then, in 2017. As a direct result of their then serious case reviews and rapid responses that they had. So in April 2020, the ICON programme was sent out to maternity units by NHS England, NHS Improvement, as a direct result of the coronavirus pandemic and the acknowledgement of the increased social isolation that would place on parents. So there was an acknowledgement of the huge pressure on parents during social isolation in confined spaces, and then put on top of that a crying baby. So there was an acknowledgement of that. There was also an acknowledgement of the fact that parents probably didn't realise, and possibly many of you wouldn't realise, that abusive injuries of babies are most common between week 6 and week 12 of a baby's life. And that links in directly with the fact that at that time, between 6 to 8 weeks, is the peak time for babies to cry. And we're going to look at that a little bit later on. So we know by helping parents to cope with crying, that should reduce the number of serious injuries a baby suffers and deaths in babies. So that's what it was. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. So the ICON programme is a simple message to reinforce to parents how they can cope, and I'm sorry, parents and carers, how they can cope with a crying infant. And the mnemonic is ICON. Quite simply, it's I for an infant crying is normal. And I think it's really important that parents understand that crying in babies is normal. All babies cry, regardless of where they are in the world, they will all cry. It's how they vocalise, it's how they communicate with us. C starts with comforting methods. How can we comfort, soothe the baby? That it's okay to walk away, but what's never, ever acceptable is that it's never acceptable to shake or harm a baby. So next slide. So why ICON? Why ICON? Well, I said before it was devised as a preventative programme. It was used to reduce abusive head trauma that can lead to life-limiting, life-changing events in the child. May mean the child is life-limited or a child has died. And what the ICON research shows is that abusive head trauma affects 24 in 100,000 babies under the age of 1 year of age. That there's an understanding that this will increase in times of austerity, got COVID-19. So we're in this kind of perfect storm, if you like, where we anticipate, we expect, we're seeing an increase in child abuse and abusive head traumas. That 70% of babies that are shaken by men. Shaken by men in the family. We know that crying is a stressor that can lead to the shaking, and that coping with a crying baby, for anyone who's had a baby, any parents, grandparents, carers, friends, families, whoever, it's hard work. It's hard work. And if you're coping with economic hardship, the COVID isolation, etc., it means it's even harder. And some of the phrases on the ICON website says that parents felt that they were living on the edge, coping with COVID, everything else, as well as a crying baby. We said that crying in babies is normal, and that message needs to be reinforced. But we also need to think that if a baby is shaken, a baby is abused, a baby suffers from an abusive head trauma, what's the cost to the child? What's the cost to the family? And what's the fiscal cost? So we're going to talk a little bit about the money, because actually I think it's relevant, and it will give weight to the justification to use a program like ICON. So when you think, if we've got a child with a head trauma or who's been subject to abuse, what's the emotional, the physical implications for that child and for that family? In fiscal terms, what about the cost of looking after a child, looking after that baby in a hospital? And I've got some figures, they are approximate, but I don't know if any of you know how much it costs on average per day to have a baby in a paediatric intensive care unit where children who've suffered an abusive head trauma would go. I don't know if MD would like to guess a number. I'm not going to do higher or lower, but I don't know if MD would like to have a guess in the message chat about how much money it costs per day to have a baby nursed and cared for in a paediatric intensive unit. And if we haven't got any, I'm going to give you the answer.
£1,000.
Oh, fabulous. Thank you to that person. What was that? £10,000, yeah. Any numbers higher or lower than that? Is MD brave enough to say? No. Okay. Well, it's a minimum of £5,000, a minimum of £5,000 a day. And that will obviously increase depending upon the level of care needs. But for an average paediatric intensive care bed, it's about £5,000 a day. That's huge if you've got babies that are having, going to have a long stay because of the abusive head trauma. Okay. And then the other kind of cost, I suppose, is how much it costs for, a review of serious child safeguarding cases. And again, Liz will be able to correct me on this, but I've plucked a figure from the internet. And on average, it's a minimum of £75,000 from start to finish to investigate the incident that's happened to that child. I was quite shocked by that, actually, but then maybe we shouldn't have been shocked. So, but the key thing is, we know that abusive head trauma, child abuse, is 100% preventable. That's what we do know. Okay, next slide, please. So when Liz and I were discussing this, this session we're delivering today, it was quite interesting that the Best Beginnings charity produced at the beginning of the month a report on babies in lockdown, and a lot of what they've said in that report links in exactly with what Liz has said at the beginning and kind of what I'm saying now. And I don't know if many of you know about Best Beginnings, but it's a charity group aimed at reducing infant mortality, reducing health inequality in the UK, particularly amongst our more hard to reach families, the families that we all work with. And, to give every baby, every child the best start. And what they did was they surveyed over 5,000 mothers, fathers and carers, and these are some of the key things that they found. So they found that 7 in 10 found their ability to cope with the pregnancy or baby had been impacted as a result of COVID-19. And I think that's quite a significant comment, because a lot of partners, and obviously we're presuming male, but actually we have same-sex couples as well, but actually partners have been excluded a lot from the pregnancy journey, the birth journey, the kind of postnatal journey during COVID. We've still got very tight restrictions. So if we're wanting to engage with the whole family, and particularly males, then COVID has had a significant impact on that. 7 in 10 felt that the changes brought about COVID were affecting their unborn baby or the young child. People have been really scared to access services directly. We know that from admissions to urgent care, to walk-in centres, to our paediatric EDs. Where are all those people that would normally be accessing? Over a third expressed confidence in being able to access mental health support, which is really positive. And I think there's been a lot of, at the end of the government and Public Health England sessions they used to do around tea time, there's been a lot of links to support groups, and certainly mental health has been very well advertised on the media. And then one of the other striking parts of the report for me were that they identified families from lower income backgrounds, those of Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. The young parents, our teenage parents, have been the hardest hit during the COVID pandemic. And those were the groups within our society that were identified as being the least likely to receive the support they needed. And that in turn will lead to widened existing health inequalities. So, that's a real worry. Thank you, Kerry. So this is the baby's cry, you can cope. This is the icon slide. I think the key message here again is that crying is normal and that you can cope. But what about our parents who already have pre-existing mental health conditions, maybe drug and alcohol problems, our carers for other adults or children? What about them? Well, what Susan Smith talks about in the ICON programme is what we call the 4 pillars, or the 4 elements of the mnemonic. And the I is about infant crying is normal and it will stop. And I think the key elements, and I'd be interested to know how many of you are aware that babies start to cry more often. Babies start to cry more frequently from about 2 weeks of age. Now, midwives and health visitors will be well aware of that, but I do wonder how many other professionals in this session today are actually aware of that. And I wonder how many parents are aware of that. So by about 2 weeks, babies start to cry a little bit more, and the crying will become more often, and it will last longer. So it will be more frequent and last longer. And it peaks at about 6 to 8 weeks of age. That's when babies will cry the most. They will cry the longest, and then it starts to tail off. And I think it's in one of the next slides, which we'll come to in a minute, there's a lovely graph that explains that. The C part is about comfort methods. Comfort methods can soothe the baby and the crying will stop. And there's I think sometimes we just presume that parents will have observed other parents parenting, including their own childhood parenting experiences, but Everybody's experiences of parenting is very different. So they may have never seen anybody look after a baby before, and then suddenly we're giving them this baby to take home. So it's a really good prompt to think about, are these babies hungry? Are they tired? Are these babies cold? Are they too hot? Do the baby need their nappy changing? Just going through that and eliminating possible causes of the crying kind of takes the parents' focus off why the baby's crying, because they're actually doing something. And by doing that interaction with the baby, that in itself may soothe the baby. Other techniques that we can talk about are talking to the baby, singing to the baby, rocking the baby. People will have their babies on their back. They may have their babies in the sling, taking the baby for a walk, sitting out in the fresh air. So all of those things are strategies, are coping techniques. And the O part is probably the most important part of the ICON programme, is that it's okay to walk away if your baby's crying and your baby's safe to leave. Parents need to be able to give themselves permission to take a breath and walk away, put the kettle on, go and stand outside, walk into another room, just be distracted as long as baby's safe. And we're only talking about a few minutes. What they're not talking about here is the controlled crying that some parents will adopt. And we're not here talking about controlled crying today. If you don't know what it is, you can Google it, but some parents will implement a controlled crying into their baby's routine. And then the end part, which is obviously it is never ever acceptable to hurt a baby. It's never acceptable to shake a baby, and the implications of this are, are far reaching. So, parents and carers need to understand that it's normal for babies to cry. Those of you who've had babies will know that all babies are different. So some babies will cry more than the last baby, and it's not because you're doing anything wrong. And that's the message we need to get across. So if we can have a look at the slide that shows the crying babies, the curves of early infant crying, please. Yeah. Now, for me, I think this is really impactful. As a parent, I wish somebody had shown me this when I was a new parent. I'm just going to let you have a few minutes to have a quick look at that. But this graph is showing the length of time a baby cries in a 24-hour period. And we don't want to categorize babies, but we do know that there are some babies who are what we call the low criers. They'll cry for maybe 20 to 40 minutes within a 24-hour period. It will be short bursts. It won't have any longevity to it. Then you've got your average criers, and then you've got the babies, the high criers. The high criers would include our babies born to substance misusing mums. And these are the babies that can cry for between 6 to 8 hours per day. But what this graph shows you, regardless of whether your baby's a low crier, an average or a high crier, that from about 2 weeks, all babies increase in the severity, the frequency, the longevity of crying until it reaches that peak at about the 6 to 8 week, the 2-month period, and then it starts to tail off. And I actually think that that this is quite reassuring to parents. It reassures them that this isn't going to go on forever, but it feels like it when you're tired. And when I first saw this, I thought of a friend's daughter who lives in an apartment. It's a very lovely apartment with a veranda, but she had 2 children under the age of 4 and then a newborn baby during COVID. And we talked about this, and even though she was an experienced mum, with COVID not being able to go out, the panic buying, her anxiety was increased, and this was her most unsettled baby. And I think that slide is really impactful. I don't know if there's any views on that. I don't know if that would help sharing it with parents when you're having a discussion with them. I certainly think it would do. Don't know if we've got any comments on the curves of early infant crying. No, I actually don't think that many parents know that babies crying increases. I really don't, and actually we should be sharing that information. So let's talk about the ICON programme and what we're doing with it. So it's a hospital-based intervention, which I said earlier. The intervention itself should take no more than 6 minutes. It's a 6 minutes briefing, so we like that because during COVID, what our women wanted to do was deliver and go home. And it has a number of elements to it. So we have a script that we follow. We give a leaflet out to the families. And if I haven't sent that across, it will go across after this discussion. And what's important about the ICON programme, that it was incorporated into the NHS emergency planning at the start of COVID-19, and the maternity units were advised to implement this into our discharge process. And you can imagine with redeployment of staff, we were all working differently. You know, this was a bit of a challenge, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But the steps are quite simple, and it's basically around the mnemonic. The infant crying is normal and it will stop. And I think by showing them that the crying curve slide, you know, that should reassure them. They need to know that it's normal, that babies cry the most between 2 and 8 weeks of age, and that the baby is crying to get your attention. It's not because you're a bad parent. It's not because the baby's being bad or the baby's being naughty or the baby's playing you up. And I think those are key phrases, again, that we need to reiterate to parents, that the baby's doing it to get your attention. And although that may be very frustrating, you know, that's the baby's only way of communicating with you. We talk about the 6 minute briefing, talks about the comfort methods, and I've already described these, so I don't want to go over those again, except to say that if a baby doesn't stop crying after all of those things, somebody else in the family, somebody else in the house needs to offer support. Or if they can't, you know, you can speak to a community midwife, a health visitor, a GP, call 111. So there's a lot of other information that people can go to, and it could be there is something wrong with the baby and the baby isn't crying, but when we're looking at this time period, that's really unlikely. We also need to acknowledge that often babies cry for no reason, and that's normal. In step 3 is the O part, that it's okay to walk away, leave your baby if your baby's safe. We're not saying that you walk away from your baby for half an hour or an hour. You know, you've gone through all your checks. And remember, you know, we shouldn't be encouraging language, oh, baby's been naughty, baby's been playing up, baby's being bad. You know, you as a parent haven't done anything wrong. As a parent, you need to be distracted from the crying. It could be that you're very hot and baby's now getting hot because you've been holding baby, trying to soothe baby. And then the 4th step is telling parents directly, clearly, succinctly, that it is never okay to shake or hurt a baby. And we need to be telling parents that. We can't presume they know that. We need to be giving them that message and talking about the consequences. And also about what we mean by a shake. What we mean by a shake. And again, it's saying to the parents, you will get tired, you will be sleep deprived, you will be frustrated, but it's still unacceptable to hurt or shake a baby. And then finally, you know, it's that you can cope with a crying baby. It will be hard, but having a baby's hard, but you will cope, you will get through this. And some of the resources that are available, I think we've, oh, sorry, no, go back. Sorry, Kerry, I went off on a tangent then, as I often do. Yeah. So that's what we do as part of the discharge and with the programme. That should be followed up by the community midwife. It's followed up by the health visitor at key points. At the peak of the crying at 6 to 8 weeks, they will have contact with the GP for a postnatal appointment. That GP needs to be asking those questions about how things are going, reiterate the key components of the ICON programme. And there is a questionnaire that they can fill in that will help them identify parents that are coping and parents that aren't. This forms part of a public health campaign. And, you know, going forward, this needs to be introduced as early as possible in the antenatal period, because that gives parents time to understand the programme, learn techniques, put in place their support network. In the ICON programme, they also talk about giving exposure to pupils in secondary schools, particularly those pupils who are identified as being likely to be our teenage parents who come from maybe more vulnerable families. And our teenage pregnancy team here in Walsall, they already engage and provide health education campaigns to particularly young girls who are likely to be at risk of a teenage parent. The programme itself, there's a one-off contribution, and then all the materials that we're going to see on the next slide can be downloaded from the website. And if you can go on to that, Kerry, that would be great. Yeah. And this is what we're using in the hospital. So we're giving the leaflet out on the, well, I'm looking at the left, so that'll be on the right-hand side of your screen. We've also put the posters, and we've just printed them off. We've just printed them off on the wards. There is a 10-minute training programme on the ICON website if anybody's interested. But I think what you're interested in is what we do in Walsall, which is on the next slide. So what we're doing in Walsall is, if we can go to the next slide, Kerry, thank you. So what we're doing in Walsall is, so when we had this briefing from NHS England, was that we put all the ICON information into our maternity app. So the maternity app is an app on your phone that gives pregnant women access to personal information about them, when their appointments are, results, etc. But it also gives them access to health information, including ICON. So we have information on there about safe sleeping, breastfeeding, domestic abuse. And so we've got the ICON information on the maternity app. But what we did was on discharge, we did the 6-minute briefing and gave the parents the information out. And there's a couple of comments here. One of my colleagues, Sinead Freeman, was going to come today and speak to you about it. Unfortunately, she couldn't be with us today, which is sad. But they both kind of expressed similar views of their experience of COVID. What's interesting is that I was in a named midwife meeting from the Black Country in the region last week, and all the hospitals are doing the same as us. They put the information on the maternity app and they were giving them information out on discharge. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute on the next slide. What we were doing, which was similar to maternity units, other units during COVID, is that our community midwives continued to have face-to-face contact with all our high-risk mums, all our mums who were open to statutory safeguarding on days 1, 5 and then days 10 to 14. So when other professionals weren't having face-to-face contact, we were still doing that. And so in a way, we were able to reinforce the programme. However, it's not been without its challenges. So if we can go to the next slide, Kerry. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to speak a bit quicker. COVID-19 presented everybody with challenges. For us, the big challenge was we weren't engaging with other family members. We were only seeing the women in antenatal clinic. The partners were only allowed in once the woman was in advanced labour and present at delivery. There was restrictions in the postnatal period. Because of COVID, many women were wanting an early discharge. So many women were being discharged home 6 hours after delivery directly from the delivery suite. Those that were on the postnatal wards were insisting on an early discharge. Some of them didn't want anybody visiting them because at the height of COVID, they were scared they were going to take COVID back to other family members. The women wanted out because they didn't want to pick up COVID, despite all the PPE. They felt their babies were at risk. So, you know, it proved challenging that we were having this discussion, giving out the leaflet, but for the majority of occasions, it was only to the mum. And, you know, that was a worry during COVID. When the partners were coming in, they didn't often come into the ward to receive the baby. So often they would drop off the car seat and they would wait outside. And again, that was because many of them were so scared about coming onto the ward, getting COVID. In the postnatal period, we also had challenges getting into the homes, even with our high-risk women. You know, often the midwives would turn up on the agreed dates and times, and often they weren't allowed in the home, particularly our more vulnerable families. Or an increased excuse we had was, oh, we've got somebody isolating. And what we were doing is we were recording the date and the time and who in the family was isolating. So they couldn't use that excuse kind of 16, 20 days later. So we had a lot of that. When we did get into some of the properties, again, only the woman and the baby was seen because the other family members didn't want to see the midwife because obviously they were in their PPE, but at least we were going in. And you know, it was hard. It was been really challenging. However, going forward, if we go to the next slide. So going forward, and Liz knows a little bit more about this than me, there is going to be investment in ICON. You know, if we're going to do it, we all need to be trained. And I know I'm talking here from a health perspective today, but actually all professionals involved with our most vulnerable families should be able to deliver this programme. And, you know, Liz has reiterated that it's no one person or one agency's responsibility to safeguard children. We have to work in partnership. We have to have this multi-agency approach. And we need to do that if we're going to move forward. Liz, I don't know if you want to say anything about what you know about going forward with the COVID. Thanks.
I'll put it in the chat if that's okay for you to keep talking.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you. You know, I think ICON is a wonderful programme. It's a great programme. I think it's a simple message, very simple message. I think the eunomic is great. I think as a practitioner, the fact that it's only going to take me 6 minutes, or should only take 6 minutes to deliver this programme and give the parents the leaflets. It's the fact that we can signpost them. You know, anything we can do to reduce, you know, the head traumas and child abuse is a positive way forward. And I'm going to go back and just say, you know, the crying slide, you know, when it talks about the increase in crying, I mean, I think that's one of the most impactful things I've seen in a long time. So, and I know I've printed off quite a lot. So that's in a nutshell what ICON is. There's some links there. There's a link for the better births, and I'm happy to take any questions if anybody's got anything they want to ask. This is when people go quiet.
There was one. Yeah, Isabel?
Sorry, I got a question, Anne.
Yeah.
Just in terms of, we talked a lot around COVID and the impact of that, and I think practitioners in children's services, whether it's on early help or social care, will have seen that impact as well. What is there any additional support we're thinking about, you know, for those parents who are really struggling and where normally they would come together and get a bit of peer support? Is there some thinking about what could provide that additional support? Or going, you know, as we're going into September, you know, there will be the backlog of parents that struggled from the start, are continuing to struggle, and then the new parents coming in. Is there some thinking around what can be done, what resources are available, where can we signpost for additional support?
I think that's a really good question, Isabel, and I honestly don't have an answer to you. What I can say is that we are beginning to lift some restrictions to how we're engaging with our families in maternity services, but actually the restrictions are really quite restrictive still. Going forward, I don't know what's going to happen in the next 3, 4, 5, 6 months. Honestly, I don't see there's going to be much change in what we're already seeing. And so therefore that means that our most vulnerable families are going to continue to lack the support that they would have had, say, pre-COVID. I'm just going to ask Di Faulkner here, who's safeguarding supervisor lead in health visiting, if she's got anything she'd like to add to that. I think she's got a comment, so I'm just going to turn the camera around if that's okay, just for a minute.
I must confess, I was busy kind of writing down a comment, so I missed part of that.
Yeah.
What was the?
It was about, you know, what for our vulnerable families, those that need support, are we going to be offering anything in the immediate time?
With the lifting of the restrictions now, we're now seeing all babies at 6 weeks, at the 6-week development check. So that's another key point where we can offer the ICON message.
And that's just been in the last couple of weeks, just in the last 2 weeks.
Yes,
and then
so that's all babies.
Yeah.
And again, at the new birth visit, between 10 and 14 days, which is another on that graph, was another, that 2-week period can be another increase in the crying stage. Yeah, we're seeing first time mothers face to face.
That's brilliant.
At that point. Second time mums, which I appreciate, it can be very difficult when you've got other children as well as a new baby. That can increase the stress levels. We're seeing those either in clinic or doing a virtual contact with those.
Yeah.
So but I think it's positive that we're seeing all babies now at 6 weeks.
So we're not quite back to our pre-COVID, but we're definitely getting there. But what I will say, Isabel, is that I know the community midwives in particular have been, you know, texting and keeping in much more regular contact than they would normally do with our mums who've got more associated vulnerabilities. We're all working in really challenging times, and I don't have an answer. I mean, Liz may have an answer to all of this.
Yeah, okay, I've just put in the chat. So partners come together. The meetings are now monthly. They started weekly, but they're now down to monthly to discuss challenges arising from COVID. And this seems like a really important one that we should be talking about, because we've had a focus here about midwifery services, but there's other services that this, you know, as Isabel's alluded to, and then you know, so Lucy, who's in the session, has added something in the chat, which is just really helpful in terms of, so it's about her personal reflections, but actually, and how she's looking forward to the 6 to 8 weeks age range of her baby. But actually, what it should be making us all think about is that unmet need. And what I'd say is that those cases, that the rapid reviews that I talked about at the very beginning of the session were in respect of children who had been born during the pandemic.
Yeah.
So I know I'm really struck by the messages that you've given Anne about the role of men and dads in this, in terms of caring for children as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, my background was many years ago was teenage pregnancy, and I wrote strategies and was involved in government level, and engaging with with fathers is absolutely vital, or the partners, whoever the partner is. But actually, the fact that it's the majority of abuse of head trauma and child abuse, shaken baby, is by males in the family. You know, that's significant, and we can't ignore that. How do we reach them?
Yeah, and I know that when I talked about the National Child Safeguarding Practice Reviews, the one that's taking place now around non-accidental injury, that includes a focus on engaging with men and dads for that very reason, Anne.
Yeah,
So oh, there's some more new messages. Let's just quickly scan them, and then we've booked a okay.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, and actually, that's what a lot of people are doing. So I think maybe I'm in the wrong profession. I think I need to be setting up a scanning clinic somewhere. But yeah, and the question you need to ask then is, if private clinics can do that, why didn't we think about having an area like we did with our people receiving chemotherapy? Why didn't we think about moving our ultrasonographers to a clean, non-COVID area of the hospital?
Yeah, anyway. Good point. Okay, I'm going to move us on to unless anybody else has got any other questions. So what you've had in terms, just to try and pull it together, Anne's given a real input around prevention. My slide had some links about information about how to access information about bruising and marks or injuries on children, and then also the link to the guidance that in the event that a child has got a bruise or a mark, what we must do, because that's been some of our local learning. So think across the spectrum from prevention to response. But the final part of should we just move on to the next slide if we can, Kerry, please? One of the things that, so when Isabel invited me to think about using one of these sessions to focus on the safeguarding partnership, I wanted to think about something that I hope has been helpful. But I equally, one of the challenges that we know exists in Walsall, but it's a national challenge, is when we do these learning reviews, which we've talked about, and lots of what we've talked about today is, even the ICON program came out of a tragic incident, is about learning from serious childcare incidences. And I'm pretty confident that we'll be no different in Walsall, that there's a challenge in terms of, we do the review, but how do we get the messages about what we can do to better safeguard children? And I don't mean that's because anybody is not doing a good job. What I mean is, how can we use the learning that is coming out of cases where we know there has been tragic incidences to improve our future practice? So that's what I mean. And the sorts of things that we've done, as of other areas, is designed a 7-minute briefing. So that's a document that's one side of paper that is circulated, usually through your safeguarding partnership representative, so somebody quite senior in your organisation. My question is, does it reach you? So had Anne and I had spent the time that we've spent planning this to design a 7-minute briefing, would it have got to you? It's quite one question. We could, and we do, have bespoke learning events around learning from, and I've used serious case reviews because we've not yet done any we haven't done any child safeguarding practice reviews. Clearly, when you do a physical event, which until COVID it would be in face-to-face, my question is, do we reach enough people? And people will be on annual leave. Yeah, and there'll only be so many sessions, yet there's a much bigger workforce. So do we reach enough people? Which is why we've tried the 7-minute briefings. We've got learning from elsewhere. So again, Anne talked about the learning that we've got around from Hampshire. So are we using the learning from elsewhere? And then often what I see, excuse me, is that the messages that go out about learning, sorry, that go out about learning from what have been called serious case reviews is about what didn't happen. So, for example, information wasn't shared, or there was a misunderstanding about the medical opinion, yeah, as an example. And that's not the same as saying what you can do in terms of that. That feels a bit deficit based rather than thinking about what does serious success look like. So giving you the tools, which is why Anne and I designed the session that we did in the way that we did. So I've got one, Kellyanne is going to put a link in the chat now. And I'm going to ask you, I hope you can still hear me with my croaky voice. When you click on this link, it's going to take you to a question. You can do it now in live time. It takes seconds. And I'm really interested in, it's the quickest way we can do it. So, how best can the Safeguarding Partnership disseminate learning from serious child safeguarding incidences? So in the way that we've done today, that's what we've talked about. How can we best do that? You know, it's you we want it to reach. And when you click on the link, you're going to be taken to a web page where you'll be able to type your responses, click enter, and then when you come back to the screen, come back into the meeting, the responses will start to come up on the screen because Kellyanne will magically create those.
Can you all see my screen? Just checking.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah.
Yeah. So can I say? I'm going to put share key messages. I think that sounds fine.
Managers, and then they cascade it down to their teams. Send it here.
Yeah, at best learning, at best can. So I put share key messages.
So whatever you think is the best way that's going to work for you, that you're going to get it. Okay, so have people had enough time to be able to? So let's bring it. So what you should now have on your screen is the collective of the responses that we've received.
Wow.
Yeah, that's thanks to Kellyanne. I'm going to be very honest and say I've played no part in the technical way of doing that, but it is it. So what you can see, and actually somebody's put food banks. I think that's a really good, just in terms of people have helped us to think about the community, not just the wider community, not just the professional community. And so some of them messages are about doing what we continue to do and what we continue to do what we have been doing. But some of them are about short briefings via Teams, email updates. So there's lots of ideas for us to take away using the Voluntary Sector Systems Advice Bureau. And you've actually helped us to think about some ways of reaching, as I said, the wider community. And then I think there's something about repeat, so constant, to not think we've done it once and it's a single exercise. If anybody's got any reflections after the session, because I am conscious of time now and people probably need either a lunch break or a comfort break. If anybody's got anything else that they want to share about why they think one would work better than the other, continue use the chat now, or if you want to email the Safeguarding Partnership just to let us know either what works best for your organisation, or that would be really helpful, because one of my constant questions to myself is, do we actually get things to the front line? So on that basis, I'm going to say Oh, Isabel, you've got your hand up?
Liz, just before we close, so a key question is, if we're going to keep repeating the messages, is the very valuable information that Anne shared today, how do we get that out to everyone? So we will be emailing the PowerPoint with all the information. The question is, would Anne and the team be available if, for instance, for children's services, if social worker teams and early help team said, actually, we would like to invite Anne in to come and talk to us so we can distribute the information or anybody available? Is that a possibility? I'm just thinking there is here some really valuable information that we need to get out to people, that people who know a parent, a grandparent that just had a newborn baby, everybody needs to be talking about this. So how do we start that? So we will disseminate the information, but then also talking to people is really important. So Anne, are you or the team available to be invited into team meetings?
Of course we will support our colleagues. Of course we'll support, and we'll do whatever we can to promote the ICON programme. That's what I'll say.
Good. So what maybe, for children's services, I'm happy to coordinate. So if there's any request, if they put it to me, and then I will email you with the request probably.
Yeah, and that's fine. I think going forward, I think I know there are plans in our Black Country Partnership and the CCGs, so I don't know how far we've got with that yet.
Yeah, because I think Sophie, the designated nurse, Sophie Willits-Rees, might be able to help as well, Isabel. So I'm meeting with Sophie in a couple of weeks, so I will pick that up in terms of the bigger piece of work that exists around ICON. I'll leave you and Anne to talk about using Anne's expertise and knowledge currently, and we'll be disseminating, as you said, the slides and information from today.
Brilliant. Right. Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Okay. So thank you to everybody who's attended and participated. We hope you're taking something away. Please do use the feedback sheet evaluation form. It's really, really helpful. And thanks, Anne, for a really, really helpful input.
Oh, thank you, Liz. I've really enjoyed it. So thank you, everybody. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you,
bye. Bye. And thanks to those who've organised it as well, Kelly and Kerry, etc. Thanks.
Thank you.
Now.
Bye.
Bye.